Welcome to Music and Medicine on Monday, a collaboration between the College of Medicine and the School of Music at the University of Iowa. This podcast is designed to help musicians play and stay healthy. This video is supplemented with more written material through the Iowa Protocols, a free medical website that you can find at the QR code or website below on this podcast. We're coming to you from the recital hall in the beautiful Voxman School of Music building at the University of Iowa. My name is Harry Hoffman and I'm a physician at the University of Iowa. Our featured student performers today are two undergraduate trombonists at the University of Iowa. Colby Schneblin is in his fourth year as a double major in accounting and trombone performance with plans for a career in music. Ryan Carter is a fourth year double major in trombone performance and musical education, with plans to continue on to grad school for trombone performance or to teach high school or middle school band after graduating from the University of Iowa. Jonathan Allen is their mentor, also a trombonist, a professor of trombone here at the University of Iowa, and will be performing with them. Today we're going to talk about preserving one of the musician's greatest assets, which is their hearing. We know musicians are at greater risk than average for hearing loss, and we'll be discussing strategies to preserve hearing. With us today are also Dr. Marlon Hansen, chairman of otolaryngology at the University of Iowa, and a specialist in hearing loss and hearing devices. We also have with us Dr. Kate Gefeller, professor emerita in the School of Music and in the Department of Otolaryngology. Her research includes music and hearing loss and hearing preservation. So Colby and Ryan are going to be playing today along with their professor, Jonathan Allen. But perhaps before starting, Ryan, if you want to talk a little bit about your inspiration, what made you want to become a musician, a little bit about why you chose trombone, and maybe a little bit about the instrument that you're playing and the song that you'll be playing as well. I think it was chosen because it's loud, is that correct?
Yeah, just a little. Again, my name is Ryan Carter. I grew up in Iowa City here, and fifth grade is when they started band when I was going through elementary school. And it's kind of a similar story to Colby's, but a little more embarrassing. I wanted to actually play flute, but there was an issue where I couldn't make a sound on the instrument. So they were like, yeah, you can't do that. Then I started playing on trombone and I just kind of loved it. And it was just like a really big passion of mine, and I was involved in almost everything in high school with music. And going into my senior year, I went to the Brevard Summer Music Institute for their summer program. And it was there just meeting all these like amazing musicians. And I was like, yeah, this is kind of where I belong and what I need to be doing. I just really fell in love with it.
So Ryan, can you talk about your instrument and where you obtained it?
Yeah, so this is Edwards bass trombone, the B502AR. And I got it up at Edwards, which is a trombone manufacturer up in Elkhorn, Wisconsin. And so this is a professionally fitted instrument. So basically I went up there and you spend 4 or 5 hours just changing out parts on the instrument. So it might be something as simple as, okay, we're gonna try a different tuning slide.
Great. And Colby, you mentioned that your love of the trombone was amplified when you took up jazz and thought of it as another way of producing a voice. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So when I was introduced to jazz back 7th grade, it was really what kind of sparked my interest into music and what is kind of driving me to want to do it and attempting to do it full time. And so really with jazz, again, it's just the extension of being able to like have a voice in music and sing like something without words through your instrument or through singing vocally. And kind of hinging off of that and the vocal aspect, like with the trombone, again, I like to think it's an extension of the voice. So like with the slide, you can do a lot of like kind of slurs going up and down, bending the pitch and everything like that, much like a vocalist can do. And no other instrument can do that. It's not physically built to do that. So when I'm playing and like I'm improvising like a jazz solo, for instance, I very much think of it as an extension of my voice. And if I was to sing over a set number of like, if I'm trying to sing like a melody in my head, like that melody in my head that I'm singing, I'm just doing it over on the trombone. It's just an extension of doing that. And so again, that's kind of what sparked my interest in that, and that like, you know, the instrument is really just like an extension of like what you're thinking and putting your musical ideas out for everyone to hear.
Terrific. So we're going to focus on producing a lot of sound And Jonathan, did you mention that the trombone is the loudest instrument in the band?
Yeah, the bass trombone actually is, studies have shown that that's the loudest acoustic instrument. They're all loud. They all can be played very loud. And one of the things that I find interesting is when you're balancing in an orchestral section specifically, the audience can typically identify the higher voices and the lower voices. So when we play things together, the second trombone, which I'll be playing second trombone today to kind of demonstrate that, needs to actually play the loudest of the three so that the acoustic effect in the hall is that it's balanced.
Can you talk about the piece that you're going to be playing and why you chose it?
Sure, we're going to play the beginning of the final movement from Bruckner's 8th Symphony. And the reason we picked this is because you got to play pretty loud.
And we'll be moving the decibel meter at a distance that is similar to that which the people playing in an orchestra will be sitting from the trombones. Is that correct?
Yeah, the section in front of us. It depends on how an orchestra is situated, but typically you might have 8 or 10 or so feet in front of you. I've been in some situations where you're packed tighter than that, but typically we like a little bit of distance.
Great. So we'll take a moment to bring our meter in place and put our hearing protectors in place. Ryan, Colby, Jonathan, that was terrific. I understand, Jonathan, that you were testing your decibel meter out and you were up to 140 decibels with the trombone close by.
Yeah, in my office actually upstairs, actually with not very much effort, I was getting pretty loud.
So Marlon, can we have you comment on the effects of music, loud music in particular, short term and long term on the human ear?
Sure, thanks, Harry. So again, that was amazing. I'm always amazed by musicians because I have no talent for that. But so thank you. Yeah. Noise, loud acoustic energy damages the inner ear. That's been known for quite a while now. I think the quote from Victor Hugo is writing about Quasimodo. He said he was deaf but not dumb for the ringing of the bells, which means deaf. He had hearing loss. Not dumb, it was postlingual, meaning it wasn't a prelingual deafness because he had normal speech, and it was because he was a bell ringer. And so people have known for quite a while that loud noises damage the inner ear. And really, historically, we've sort of divided into two temporally related events. So one's called a temporary threshold shift, where if you're exposed to excessively loud noise, that's very excessively loud, you can have a hearing loss that's detectable by testing that may last a day or two or something like that, or maybe even only a few hours and then recover. For a long time, they felt that that would be a full recovery, that if you had one of those events, then you recovered a temporary threshold shift, that it didn't have any permanent effects. And then they recognized also that exposure to loud noises over significant periods of time instead of an acute one-time event could lead to permanent threshold shifts or permanent hearing loss. And now we know that paradigm is not really quite true, that even these temporary events, if you have enough hearing or enough noise exposure that you have fullness or pressure or feel like your hearing's a little diminished or get ringing in your ears, you've probably started something that in the long term, down the road, years, decades down the road, is going to become manifest. So the system has, there's this gradual decline, and even if you have it now, so like when I see a patient, whether they worked in a factory, saw recently a young lady who was a skeet shooter. There's lots of other types, military people. Even if they had, so military veterans are a good example. They go through basic training, they may have a slight shift in their hearing. By the time we see them in their 70s at the Veterans Hospital, they all have a significant noise-induced hearing loss, even if they weren't exposed to that much more noise. That event that happened in their early 20s can sometimes become manifest in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. And I think it's the other thing that maybe is perhaps important. We always talk about threshold. That's the ability to hear a specific tone, and that's a very unrefined event or unrefined acoustical task. Can you hear or detect this tone? What people really suffer from is the ability to discriminate different things. So your ability to discriminate these very fine nuanced things like in music or in speech and complex listening environments like background noise, that's where the noise-induced elements become even more difficult. So people don't really come in saying, I don't hear this sound. What they come in saying is, when I'm in a background noisy situation, I can't understand what people are saying to me.
Terrific. Well, we'll come back to ask some questions about what to do once your hearing is lost and maybe some hope for the future. But then we'll go to Kate maybe to share some strategies about how musicians can protect their hearing.
Okay, well, I'm a musician myself, and one of the things that I think is that music, being able to hear the music in a sensitive way is really an important part of your career. And unfortunately, I've had a lot of calls that have been done sort of confidentially from people I know who are musicians who say, oh no, I'm starting to have ringing in my ear, or I can't hear like I used to. And it's a really emotional loss for them. So one of the things they say, what can I do? Well, sometimes the horse is already out of the barn, but they can still take steps to try to protect what they have. And there are three things that I would say that are kind of basic. One is that you want to pay attention. Two, you want to protect your hearing. And three, you want to plan ahead. Now what I mean by that is, first of all, pay attention. We live in a really noisy world, so you want to actually notice, oh my gosh, this is a really noisy hockey game, or wow, this is a really noisy movie. Gosh, that may not be good for my musician's ear, okay? So then you take the next step, and that's protecting your hearing. Okay, there are two basic ways to really work on that. One thing is you want to reduce the dosage of overly loud sounds, okay? And you can do that in a number of simple ways. You want to be a really creative ear protector. So let's say you go into a club and there's a great jazz band playing. Don't sit right next to the jazz band. Sit in the back of the room. It's going to change the decibels that are going to potentially damage your hearing. Okay, another thing, let's say you're a pianist. You don't have to practice with the lid up all the time. Shut the lid. Or let's say that you're playing and you're just working on what they call wood shedding or your fingering. You don't have to play fortissimo just to get your fingers working. And if you use an MP3, your own personal player, put a governor on there so that it isn't going to go over 85 decibels, and you can protect your hearing that way. Okay, now sometimes you're in situations like you're in the marching band and you're in the stadium, the Hawkeye Stadium, and it's like 120 decibels over there, and you can't control that, but you can bring your hearing protection. So with your hearing protection, what you can do is you can, and if I am a musician, I have custom-made hearing protection for my ears. They're really good. They allow me to hear music pretty well, but it protects my ears from all those really damaging sounds. Okay? Now you might say, but I need to really be able to hear everyone around me in rehearsals. True. So one of the things that good musicians sometimes do is they'll wear one in their right ear for half the rehearsal, and then they switch over to the left ear for the other half the rehearsal. And so that saves their hearing by about 50%. Okay, the third thing is plan ahead. I would say that dosage of loud sounds is a little bit like being on a diet. Okay, you want to have a healthy, sound diet. So, one of the things you want to do is actually plan ahead. Let's say you have a great, big, important concert or recital that night. You want to build in a little bit of quiet time early in the day and then after the program. Okay, and then another thing you want to do is you want to decide, when I'm practicing, when is it important for me to have open ears and when is it important for me to protect my ears, okay? So it's not all or none. It's a matter of balancing. So I see it as hearing protection now. Maybe it's not quite as exciting as listening to 120 decibels, but don't you want to hear music beautifully when you're 30, 40, 50? So that's kind of what I think is really important for musicians to consider.
Terrific. Well, sometimes when you're 20, you're not thinking ahead to 30.
Absolutely.
But Colby, you're not thinking so far ahead to 30, but I do understand you use ear protection. Can you show us what you use?
I do, actually. So I bought these 2 years ago. It was a Christmas present from my mom, actually. And so they're called ear erasers, and so I got the medium size because I don't really have the biggest ears. And so it's kind of like a stock option. They make different sizes, like small, medium, large, depending on like what size best fits your ears. And originally I was like kind of against hearing protection. Like I just wanted to use my natural ears. I was like, I'll be fine. Like I'm just gonna, I'll just try and be careful. But it was after this would have been sophomore year. I was playing in band and I noticed that semester that like my ears were just constantly ringing, and like it was like to the point like I'd try and fall asleep and just like my head, it was hard for me to fall asleep because my ears were just always ringing from the loud like pieces that we were doing, because like in the band you're set up specifically for the trombone section. Ryan also knows this, like they're literally just a couple feet in back. You snare drum, timpani, bass drum, all those like really loud percussion instruments. And so it's loud out in the hall, right? But imagine how loud it is a few feet from your ears. And so it was after that moment, sophomore year, I was like, okay, I can't do this anymore. Like I need to get hearing protection. And probably one of the best decisions I made, because like, again, if I would have continued on the trajectory I was at, it could have been probably a lot worse if I just did not take any action.
Terrific. Ryan, can you comment on your feelings about hearing protection?
I actually have not used as much hearing protection as I probably should. Well, almost certainly should have up to this point. Whether that's in my time in the Hawkeye Marching Band or my time in high school even, like looking way back even to then, regardless of what ensembles I'm playing in, I was always playing in the loudest sections, or if I'm playing like in a New Orleans brass band type setup, I'll be playing sousaphone for that. So you're constantly around it. And I've noticed the difference over the years of like how my hearing has gotten. And it's particularly in the high end of the frequencies where it's like, oh, that's not the same as it was even, like 4 or 5 years ago. So it's one of those things that I most certainly need to, but just haven't done it yet.
Did you hear what Kate had to say? No, you didn't. So, Jonathan, I guess there's some resistance among musicians to use hearing protection, partly because you have to hear what you're playing, what others are playing around you. You want to comment on that?
Sure. I think there's a lot of reasons why people don't use hearing protection. One, I think, naivety of youth, right? Just you don't think you need it. You don't feel like you're being impacted at the moment. There could be the cost. College students generally don't have a lot of money, but you really don't have to spend a lot of money to get good hearing protection. And there's programs here in the School of Music where students can get free musician earplugs, so highly recommend for University of Iowa students to do that. There may be a social aspect as well, where people don't think it's cool. That's very, very, very possible. I think all those are reasons. But when you're in a professional environment, when you're playing with an orchestra, 3/4 of the people probably have earplugs on at some point in the concert. I am a situational earplug user. I get to know the music. Trombone's typically in an orchestra in the last row. Sometimes you might have a timpani next to you, so I know when the timpani is going to play, and I put my hearing protection in before the timpani plays. And when it's a slow movement that only the strings are playing, I take it out and I really enjoy the full sound of the string section. So for me, part of my hearing protection is Also helps me to get to know the music better. So part of it is personal study. That's part of plan ahead. For me, part of planning ahead is getting to know the music and know when I should use my hearing protection and when it's okay to be open.
So I have some loop hearing protectors that work to attenuate the sound by about 30 decibels. I gave to Marlon my 18 decibel attenuators. And my understanding is that there are some pretty sophisticated ones that you want to use that will attenuate the frequencies equally across all frequencies. Do you want to give some background as to the ideal hearing protection for musicians? I don't know who to ask, Marlon or Kate or Jonathan?
I just know that when you buy really inexpensive hearing protection, like the little foam rollers you might get at a shooting range or something like that, it feels like you're underwater and you can't tune next to the people. And I think a lot of people, that's their first introduction to hearing protection, is kind of these low budget options, and then they think, oh, this just isn't for me because I can't hear anything and it distorts the sound. I can't hear myself.
Yeah. I tell you what, I don't like those. I wouldn't wear them. I wouldn't use them. So
The foam protectors you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Those from the drugstore, because you can't really enjoy the music or hear yourself. These are custom fit. So I actually went in to see an audiologist. They did a mold of my ear, and they're made exactly for my ears. And then they have a special filter on them that is, you can have some types if you're a clarinetist, you might have other types if you play trombone. And so they can actually fit them for the kind of instrument that you play. And I can hear people talking, but it also attenuates across all of the harmonics. So it doesn't give you that horrible feeling that you're talking about where it's like being underwater.
Are those expensive?
They were $126. I figure, that's like going to Starbucks for, 10 times. And actually, these last me for, I've had some for 10 years. And I take them to movies. I take them everywhere I go. I have this little container. I put it in my purse, so you can put it, on your key ring.
And where did you get those?
I got those actually over at the Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders. I just made an appointment, went in, got it, and they're great.
So Marlon, I wanted to ask you about what to do when your hearing has deteriorated and you want to be a musician. And one of the questions that I really still have is, when you wear a hearing aid, are you destroying your hearing more by amplifying the sound in the process of trying to hear what's going on?
That's a really interesting question. And hearing aids will also distort a little bit. They're not perfect. So I don't know many musicians who wear hearing aids at the time that they're performing or practicing or things like that. I think hearing aids are really critical if you're struggling, especially in communicating with people and engaging with people socially and things like that. There's lots of data now to support the notion that hearing loss is the #1 preventable or treatable cause or leading risk factor for dementia or cognitive decline. And treatment, the most recent data show that treatment with cochlear implants for the profoundly deaf or hearing aids either delay that or even reverse it to some levels. Those are the things we can do. The most important thing, like Kate, Dr. Gefeller said, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Really, you've got to prevent it, and you've got to prevent it early on. So her notion of, being prepared, it's really hard, high schoolers, college students, to really get it in their minds that this is important. But I promise you, you'll see it. I see it in all the patients who come in later, and they're suffering, they're miserable. It's the most miserable patients I see are with hearing loss are sound engineers. They're probably the worst. And they'll say, I have a hole in my hearing at 12,000 hertz right here. And I'm just like, I'm not sure what I can do about that. So they really suffer because they're very tuned in. And then musicians are the second most. And they really struggle. And then it's people who communicate and talk with others. But even before it's affecting your ability to communicate with those around you, musicians start to really suffer because of their hearing loss, even at less levels of hearing loss than the normal, like the farmer who comes in.
So you mentioned cochlear implants. I know Kate has done a lot of work and research with musicians and music appreciation with cochlear implants. Can you still appreciate music with cochlear implants?
Not near as well as natural hearing. So the best is someone who hears normally, naturally, but not like me, because I can't. I'm tone deaf. But but normal acoustically people, that's by far the best. Even if you can save a little bit of that, I think Dr. Gefeller will tell you that now with cochlear implants, we put a lot of effort into saving any residual acoustic hearing that's within the ear, because it has such a tremendous benefit for their ability to appreciate and use music and understand music. And that's really, Dr. Gefeller's work kind of led the way on that. If you only have a cochlear implant, you can do it. There's some of the kids that were born profoundly deaf played in the Hawkeye marching band, and they can perform musically. But it's not they are not as capable. And for adults who heard naturally and then lose their hearing, then music really doesn't have quite the same richness that it does for other people. I don't know, Kate, you can probably explain more.
Well, I just wanted to add that even if it isn't so much the hearing loss, I get a lot of phone calls from musicians who have tinnitus.
Yeah.
And I just want to say that is not a party either. If you know, that's a whole nother topic for another Music and Medicine on Monday. But tinnitus can really make people's lives miserable, and you could talk more about that. But the musicians who have that, you know, Beethoven did not have a fun time with it, and the musicians I know now who live with that have quite a time.
So Marlon, can you predict the future? Hair cell regeneration, gene therapy, stem cells, improved cochlear implants? Is there hope for those of us as we turn 80, 90, and 100 that we're going to have hearing?
Yes, there's hope. It's always getting better. And just within the last couple of months, we've launched the first gene therapy trials for a very, very specific type of congenital deafness. It's a very specific type. And the very first looks very promising, restored some hearing. How long it lasts and things like that. But I think hair cell regeneration, so regenerative medicine will play a role. I think hair cell regeneration is a long ways away, but there's other things, preventative things, other pharmaceutical and gene therapies that may not be restoring hair cells, but are restoring function within the ear. And they may or may not be coupled with cochlear implants.
Yeah.
Terrific.
It seems to me, too, if it could become cool and hip among young musicians to wear hearing protection, you know, if it could be kind of like the thing, well, do you have your hearing protection? Well, I have mine. You know, I mean, I think that would be a good thing. Or if the studio professors were to say, listen, guys, we want to have you be, you know, hearing
well. It needs to start even at the high school level.
Yes.
I think that's where we really need the interventions to be, is it just needs to become, just like in football now, it's really common that you worry about traumatic brain injury. And I can promise you there's a lot more acoustic damage to the ear that's being done in our high schools than traumatic brain injury to the football athletes.
So
And
Ryan,
so I think it needs to come at that level. And music, you know, people who do private music lessons should probably encourage a lot of it. So kudos to you for doing this, for tackling this.
well, kudos to Kobe for starting it, and for Ryan, who's going to be adopting it, I hope, in the near future. That'll be the face of the youthful hearing protective surge that we're going to be seeing. And Jonathan, thank you for also performing wonderfully with your two students. Kate and Marlon, thank you very much. And so I'd like to close by saying additional detail regarding this and other episodes of Music and Medicine on Monday can be accessed by visiting the Iowa Protocols through the QR code displayed or the website address, or simply by searching on the web for Iowa Protocols, Music and Medicine on Monday.
Thank you.